What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and as always, I've got my weekly waiver wire pickups for you. This time, week 8, top targets you want to go after, so let's get right into it. Kicking things off at the quarterback position, we start with Mitchell Trubisky, who had a very impressive fantasy showing versus the New England Patriots. And this next week versus the New York Jets, it's going to be another positive matchup for Trubisky on paper. We've seen how Sam Darnold struggles against top-notch defenses, and I do think the rookie can get exposed by that Bears defense, which will give even more opportunities for Mitchell Trubisky and that offense. This last week, 333 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but where there was even more value was rushing-wise for Trubisky. 81 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown. I don't expect him to reach those rushing yards, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does add a rushing touchdown. So with that being said, very nice matchup. I do think the Bears will have multiple opportunities offensively, so Trubisky not a bad streaming option for week 8. Next up, we've got CJ Beathard, who admittedly still this last week had a very poor performance versus the Rams. 170 yards passing, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, but that's what happens when you face the Rams and when you're playing from behind. However, in week 8, he gets the Arizona Cardinals, and matchup-wise, it's not a bad option. Beathard, and along with some of his other weapons and Marquise Goodwin, George Kittle, I could see exposing that Arizona defense that just isn't on the same level right now as what we've seen in years past. Offensively, they're struggling too, which opens up a lot of opportunities for opposing offenses that face the Arizona Cardinals. I could see Beathard having a nice day through the air. We've seen it before up until this contest with the Rams. He has done a nice job of airing it out. I expect it to continue in week 8. Continuing on, we've got a familiar name here in Alex Smith, who, look, this last week, he got the victory versus the Cowboys. Wasn't that impressive stat-wise. 178 yards, only 1 touchdown. But this week 8 matchup is enticing because he goes up versus that Giants team that has been struggling all around, offensively, defensively. And Alex Smith, a guy that I do think can go ahead, expose that defense, and find himself in a matchup where he gets about 200, maybe 300 yards passing and at least 2 touchdowns. Again, not a bad streaming option considering all the buys that we have rolling up. The last quarterback on this list is Derek Carr of the Raiders. And look, I realize what everyone's going to say here. The Raiders have been pretty much a do-not-touch team, and even more so now with all the news that have been breaking about the Raiders these last couple of hours. Marshawn Lynch on IR, Amari Cooper being traded, but we'll address those in a little bit. However, Derek Carr this week, week 8, coming off of the bye week, even without Amari Cooper, I still like the matchup because it will be versus the Indianapolis Colts. Even though the Colts looked good this last week, their defense is still subpar. I think Derek Carr can have a good day here. Offensively, I see some success opportunities for the Raiders. I don't necessarily think that they are going to be able to win this game, but offensively, they should be able to put up some points. Getting to our running backs, we start off with a duo in Oakland, Jalen Richard and Doug Martin. And look, as promised, we are going to address all of these issues with the Raiders, starting with the running back position first of all, because Marshawn Lynch on IR. So now it's going to be the Richard and Doug Martin show. The question is, which is the guy to own? Personally, I think it's Richard. Not only does he have a higher ceiling in PPR, but he's also the more fresh. He's the faster running back out of the two. He's the one that we've seen have more success so far this season. I realize Doug Martin was brought in because he fits that bill of a bruiser. We've seen it before in Tampa Bay. He fits the bill of the kind of guy that Gruden likes more so. But think about all this. With all the weapons that the Raiders have lost and with how bad that offense has looked and how much they've played from behind, it's going to be more friendly for a pass-catching running back, and that is Jalen Richard. So if I am in this situation and I have an option between Richard and Martin, I would prioritize Richard, but at the same time, I would take a flyer on Doug Martin until we know exactly how that backfield situation will shape out. Next up, we have got Kenjon Barner of the Patriots. And again, this is a direct result of an injury, unfortunately, again, with Sony Michel going down in that Bears game. And we've seen conflicting reports from this could be serious to maybe not that bad. The latest we've heard so far is it's going to be a week-to-week situation. So honestly, that's probably the best case scenario for the Patriots. But I would bet some money that Michel at least misses 1 or 2 games. So in that time period, Kenjon Barner should be the primary rusher of the football. Look, I still expect James White to be the guy to own in that backfield because of what he can do as a pass catcher, and he will undoubtedly get some of those carries that Sony Michel would originally have. But Kenjon Barner, I think, will still be the primary rusher of the football. I don't anticipate him having the same success as Sony Michel, but not a bad guy to go ahead and take a flyer on, because with that Patriots offense, it's an offense to go ahead and invest stock in all around. Continuing on, we have got Chris Ivory of the Bills, and again, unfortunately, injury-related addition here because LaShawn McCoy left that game versus the Indianapolis Colts head injury, and in the wake of that injury, Chris Ivory had 16 carries for 81 yards and then 3 receptions for 25 yards as well. Look, undoubtedly so, Ivory is not as good of a pass catcher as LaShawn McCoy, but he still put up respectable yardage on the ground. He's more of a physical running back, and we've seen it before. In the absence of LaShawn McCoy, Chris Ivory isn't a bad fill-in, probably more of a low-end running back too, more so a flex option. I like him better in standard leagues, but again, not a bad guy to go ahead, take advantage of while LaShawn McCoy figures that situation out and we see how long that injury could potentially last. The last running back on this list is Raheem Mostert of the San Francisco 49ers, who had 7 carries for 59 yards in that loss to the Rams. And unfortunately so, it's been a revolving door at the running back position for San Francisco. McKinnon goes down, then it's Breida, then it's Morris. And then Breida gets nicked up again this last week, and Mostert looked good. He has done some good things on limited opportunities with the kind of usage that's been all over the map for Alfred Morris. I would go ahead and take Mostert over Morris. He is the more preferred option. I think he fits the bill in terms of a guy that's more similar to Breida. So for that reason, I'd go ahead, take a flyer on Mostert. Not a bad option this week versus the Arizona Cardinals as well. Transitioning to our wide receivers, we start with the guy that I would prioritize over all of these names in Danny Amendola of the Dolphins, who these last 2 weeks has quietly put together some really nice stats. This week versus the Detroit Lions, 6 receptions for 84 yards and a touchdown. Look, the fact of the matter is Albert Wilson, even with how good he looked versus the Bears, he got hurt this last week. And that injury not looking good. Kenny Stills nicked up. Devontae Parker, he's kind of in the doghouse with that Miami offense and the organization, the team as a whole. So who else does that leave? Danny Amendola. He's a nice PPR option, and he's been getting it done even with Brock Osweiler there. So for that reason, I really like him. I think he could potentially be a wide receiver number 2. He is the guy that above all else, I would go ahead and try and add if he is available on your teams. Continuing on, we have another pair of Oakland teammates. The trend continues. Jordy Nelson and Seth Roberts. And again, this is a direct result because of a move that the Oakland Raiders made, and that is trading Amari Cooper. So what does that mean? Well, most likely that Jordy Nelson will be the prime beneficiary of all of this. He's had some nice weeks so far. Coming off of the bye week, I expect him to be the new wide receiver 1 in that offense, and an offense that's going to be throwing the football a lot. Again, with this updated status, I think he can be a nice wide receiver number 2, but a guy that you shouldn't be sleeping on, and that's definitely having a higher chance of being available than Jordy Nelson, who more than likely in majority of leagues is already owned, possibly riding the bench. But Seth Roberts, he is the guy that I think as a PPR option, a slot guy, after Jordy Nelson, Martavius Bryant has had some troubles in terms of catching the football. I like Seth Roberts. He has that connection with Carr. He's been successful previously, and he knows that offense, even as much as it has changed with Gruden there. So for that reason, I actually think it'll be Jordy Nelson, wide receiver number 1 in that offense, and then Seth Roberts, wide receiver number 2 for the Raiders. Probably more of a deeper league stash, but I'd go ahead, take a flyer on him. Next up, I've got Geronimo Allison of the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay, coming back from the bye week, gets a very attractive matchup versus the New Orleans Saints in what could be an offensive shootout. And I think all of those wide receivers are going to benefit from that, including Geronimo Allison, who should have used that extra bye week to go ahead and heal up from his injury. Same situation with Randall Cobb, but I do think at this point, Geronimo Allison, a little bit more of a guy that you can rely on compared to Cobb, who keeps getting nicked up. It's been his MO, unfortunately. We said it at the start of the season. If he could stay on the field, he could be a really nice option. Unfortunately, he hasn't really been able to do that. Insert Geronimo Allison, who I do think fits the bill in terms of a more physical guy, taller, a guy that can use his frame, similar to Davante Adams that Aaron Rodgers can go ahead, lean to. I think if the trend continues, I see him emerging as the wide receiver number 2 for the Green Bay Packers as the season goes along. So for that reason, if I can go ahead, invest stock in anyone on that Green Bay offense, I'm going to go ahead and take the chance. Moving on, we've got Tre'Quan Smith of the New Orleans Saints, and after Ted Ginn was placed on IR, that opened up a slot, wide receiver number 2 for the Saints behind Michael Thomas. And similar to the situation with the Green Bay Packers, this is an offense you want to go ahead and invest stock in. The question was, would it be Smith or Cameron Meredith that kind of separated themselves this last week versus the Ravens? And Meredith didn't really do that. Smith, now, he only had 3 receptions for 44 yards, but the week prior, he had a huge game. That was somewhat of a coming out party, and he's continued the trend, at least in terms of targets. So this week, in what could be a very, again, good matchup offensively, I'd go ahead in a potential shootout, invest in Tre'Quan Smith. The last wide receiver on this list, Devin Funchess, probably the least likely name to be available off waivers, but if he is, I'd go ahead, take a chance on him. 6 receptions for 62 yards and a touchdown. As far as weapons on that offense for Carolina, Torrey Smith got banged up in the win versus the Eagles. I think it's easy to see Greg Olsen still not 100%. He's still being phased into that offense. That doesn't leave too many other options. Devin Funchess is that possession wide receiver. He's that big target in the end zone. I'd go ahead, if he's available, I'd pick him up and insert him as a wide receiver number 2 without too much to worry. Looking at our tight ends next, not too long of a list this week, but regardless, we start with Vance McDonald. The Steelers, they had their bye week this week 7, so probably a lot of people went ahead, released Vance McDonald to go ahead and clear up a space for a potential another tight end. Well, guess what? The Steelers are back from the bye week. They get the Cleveland Browns at home. A good matchup. That Pittsburgh offense has been potent since day one, and recently we've seen the Cleveland Browns defense break a little bit. So for that reason, I'd go ahead, take a chance on Vance McDonald. I think he's been the more consistent tight end compared to Jesse James. We still don't know what's going to happen with Le'Veon Bell, so there are still some extra targets to be had, and Vance McDonald can be that guy. The second and final name out of these tight ends is Jack Doyle of the Colts. And the fact of the matter is he has been injured for several weeks now, but he did start the season as tight end number 1 for Indianapolis. Circumstantially, Eric Ebron became the guy to own after Doyle got hurt, and in an offense that's been putting up a lot of points, Ebron has benefited greatly. But I do think when Jack Doyle returns, and reports are it could very well be this week, he will for the most part regain that position as tight end number 1. Maybe not right away, but I'd go ahead, invest a pick in him because after T.Y. Hilton, he is the option that Andrew Luck will go to the most. Finally, getting to our defenses, we start with the team, as always, that'll be playing the Buffalo Bills, and this week it is the New England Patriots. Look, I realize they let up a bunch of points to the Chicago Bears this last week, but playing the Buffalo Bills is a different situation. Even though this is a divisional game, I expect Tom Brady and that entire team to go ahead, dominate this game from start to finish. Whoever is quarterback, Derek Anderson, Josh Allen, I think both of them are going to have troubles. The best weapon for the Bills won't be there in LaShawn McCoy, so I'd go ahead, take a flyer on the New England Patriots for week 8. Next up, we've got the Baltimore Ravens, who by all accounts have been a good fantasy football defense for the majority of the season, but it's possible they were dropped this week because they had to face that offensive juggernaut that is the New Orleans Saints. So if that is the case, go ahead, pick them up because they'll be playing the Carolina Panthers. And the truth is, Cam Newton does struggle when he faces top-tier defenses, and I do think the Baltimore Ravens are one of those defenses this year. Now, I could still see the Panthers winning this game, but I don't see them scoring more than 20, 23, 24 points, something like that. And I do think Cam will be good for at least 1 or 2 interceptions, which, when it's all said and done, will make for a good day for the Ravens defensively. The last defense on this list, Washington Redskins, who are going to be going up against the New York Giants in Week 8, a divisional game. These can be lower scoring as we've seen before. And the fact of the matter is, the Giants are approaching that territory where they are a matchup that you want to go ahead and exploit. Eli Manning, even though he does have the potential to put up a lot of points, he does also have the potential to put up a lot of turnovers, whether it be fumbles, whether it be interceptions. I do think this will be a lower scoring game, which will favor the Washington Redskins and that defense. So for that reason, I'd go ahead and scoop them up in this matchup. So with that, we finish up our top waiver wire targets for Week 8. And as always, let me hear it in the comment section. Are there guys that I should have included, the guys that I shouldn't have? And if you have any other questions, make sure, go ahead, let me hear it, and I'll do my best to go ahead, get them answered. And additionally, as always, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.